Okay, thanks, Michael. So I was asked to look at a case study around the calf for endurance athletics. I'm the endurance physiotherapist for British Athletics, and so I wanted to look at a calf injury in one of our 800-meter runners. And I guess the start point of the rehabilitation was to understand the end point that we need to get to. So I think in elite sport we need to understand what the end point is and what we want to achieve to try and optimize the delivery of that and try and provide the athlete the best opportunity and put them in the right place to do what it is they need to do. So in this case, we've got Elliot Giles, as I said, who's the Great Britain international endurance athlete, who's got a PB of 1 minute 44.99, and that compares to Rhodesia, whose world record is 140.9. So he's got a little bit of work to do to get to that level, but obviously one of our best athletes. What the 800-meter looks like for him could be quite variable. So in a one-off race, if we just think of a one-off race, it could be an absolutely flat out, eyeballs out, you've got to go sort of race, or it could be a slow tactical race that's slow at the start with a fast finish and a real burn up, or anything in between. So we have to be aware of what the demands of those things are and prepare him for that. And the ultimate aim for the sport, for the athlete, for the team around the athlete is to get him on the podium at a major games and potentially win an Olympic medal, which is the ultimate target. If he's going to win an Olympic medal, he's going to have to do 3 rounds in 4 days and close to and probably faster than PB pace. So he's got quite a tough ask to be at his absolute best in the final on the 4th day of competition after 2 other rounds. And we kind of think that in order to win an Olympic medal, you either have to be freakish like a Rhodesia, or you have to train consistently and race consistently for a reasonable block of time, around 2 years prior to the competition. So keeping the athletes healthy and getting them back when they have niggles is obviously pretty important. So if we look at, this is just now trying to understand Elliot and what Elliot has to do. So if we look at the true run race that we talked about, we're looking at him achieving a maximum velocity of around 9 meters a second. So that's not something that he can sustain, but that's the sort of speed that he's going to be traveling at, and probably an average of around 8 meters per second. At those sorts of speeds, Elliot's going to be taking strides of around 2.13 meters. And his stride length will shorten towards the end of the race, but it probably won't drop below 2 meters in that true run race. And so he's around 70 kilo athlete, and we're looking at around 5 times body weight. So we're looking at 65,800 kilograms of force per limb that he has to absorb. And we've worked that out off approximately 188 foot contacts per lap, so 94 per limb, but 188 in an 800 meters. So that's how we've kind of done the sums around that. And in a tactical race, again, similar maximum velocity, we expect him to reach 9 meters per second at some point, probably later in the race when he's a little bit fatigued in this case, and the acceleration's coming. The stride length will probably start slightly shorter, down towards the 1.8 meters, but getting up to over 2 meters and at the faster velocities at the end of the race. We've got more steps because the paces are slower, so we've got more foot contacts, and therefore probably a little bit more force that you would have to cope with in the tactical race. So around 70,000 kilos there. And then we look at a normal training session on the track in the summer, where the volume is likely to be between 2 and 5k, and we're looking at average speeds of around 7.5 meters per second. Now, obviously, that's the average, so there's going to be times where he's asked to run really quick. He might do some flying 30s, he might do some maximum accelerations, and he might do some really high speed running way faster than race pace. Equally, he may be doing some low end tempo at the start or at the end of a session. But so we've worked out an average around 7.5 meters per second, around a 1.5 meter stride length. And so we're looking at over 500,000 kilograms of force per limb in a training session. Just to give a bit of detail on the 5 times body weight, I know it's could be slightly spurious to give a number. I know Dawn has looked at up to 4.3 times body weight in his paper, Professor Ralph Mann talks about up to 8 times body weight in elite sprinting, and Pavel Komi has looked at 12.5 times body weight in elite sprinting at the ankle and the Achilles tendon. So we've got an estimate of around 5 times body weight. The other thing that we need to be aware of there is that the elastic energy is more efficient than the mechanical load. So from an elastic energy point of view, you can probably take about a minimum of 20% of that load can be taken away from that off the elastic component. The other thing that I would need to be aware of here would be that when I'm looking at those race day situations of the true run race or the tactical race, is that I'm not there taking into account the warm up, the strides, the drills, the warm down. So you've got a whole lot more volume around there, which makes a race day probably well over 5 kilometers of running. So again, a reasonably big volume, even on what you'd consider a smaller high-end race day. And on top of this as well, you've got to add in that he's likely to be running between 50 and 60 miles in his week, with additional cross training and 2 or 3 S&C sessions per week. And for him, that training session day, that big volume training session day, that's the day where he's likely to do his hard S&C sessions as well. So hard days are hard. The amount of volume that he has to cope with is much bigger on that training day. So we're getting an idea of what the demands are, what we need to get him back to. So this particular injury is a little bit unusual for an 800-meter runner, but he was actually he picked up the injury in a cross-country relay. This was just around when I started working for British Athletics in November 2018, and he felt a sharp pull in his left-hand side calf. He had about 100 meters of the race left to run. He was just going down a little dip on undulating terrain, wearing spikes. Felt a sharp pain. Finished the race, but with minimal discomfort. Because the race wasn't local, it involved a reasonable amount of travel. He then had to look after himself a little bit, but he compressed and he iced. Within 30 minutes of finishing the race, he iced and compressed, but he wasn't seen because he had to travel back home, so he wasn't seen for around 48 hours. When he was seen, the classic signs of a soft tissue injury were there, with pain on resisted testing, pain on palpation, and pain on stretch. And then the MRI scan confirmed the diagnosis, which was in the British Athletics classification, a 1B muscular tendinous junction injury of his left-hand side soleus. There was no fibre damage in this, but there was some edema. So we're pretty clear about the demands of 800-meter running, and then I wanted to look a little bit more at the demands on the calf complex. So what do we know about the calf, and how hard does it have to work? And we know that the calf essentially works isometrically at the faster running speeds that we're talking about for the 800 meters, and that the tendons then act as springs to return the energy for propulsion, and that elastic component that we talked about as well. But we also know that the demand of running for the foot ankle, for the shank, is high at all running speeds, and the hip obviously has a greater component at the faster speeds that we're talking about as well. The hip comes in more. But Dawn et al. Showed us that at speeds of up to 7 meters per second, the key determinant for running came from the ankle plantar flexors. And we've also got from Dawn that we know across all running speeds, triceps surae and vasti have been shown to provide around 75% of all vertical support that we need to accelerate the body upwards. And the big thing from that, from our point of view around this calf issue, is that Soleus contributes up to 50% of that in some cases. So the Soleus is the monster of the foot ankle complex, and a really important muscle to know what it does and how it works. Okay, so that brings me on to the Soleus structure and function, and that better understanding of what Soleus is designed to do. So we know that its aponeurosis blends to the crural fascia, and therefore links the hamstrings to the plantar fascia. We know that it has short muscle fibers with a large cross-sectional area, and the fascicle angles are oblique to the tendon, which allows it to produce really high levels of force. We know it's got a really good aerobic capacity. And then from a functional point of view, we know that along with gastroc, it's a key muscle for propulsion. but it also creates force closure at the inferior and superior tib-fib joints, and that's achieved through the tendon and the fascicle angles. And we know that it's a key controller of rotation at the shank and foot, and that it's a supinator of the subtalar joint and the talocrural joint. And importantly for us, and importantly for me from a rehab point of view, that means that I know that Soleus is going to eccentrically control pronation. So a little bit of background, I guess, on me and my thought processes and how I work. During my time prior to working for British Athletics, I worked for the British Olympic Association at the intensive rehab unit at Bisham Abbey, and we kind of had this philosophical model and this problem-solving model where we use structure, function, metabolism, and movement, and they were our 4 pillars, which essentially underpinned performance and kept the athlete central to the whole process. To give you more context again from a structure point of view, so structure would be for us in this context and how we used it. Structure would be concerned with the morphology and the pathology, which may be either limiting or altering the movement, which may then impact on the function or the metabolism. So if we understand and we can optimize the structure, then we felt we could influence all the other pillars because they are directly related. So there's a strong interrelation between them all. Function would be the ability to produce the right force at the right time for the right task. Movement was seen as the ability to be efficient and use variability under the demands of the movement task. So the greater the variability of movement, the greater the chance of reducing injury risk was how we saw it. And then metabolism would be your efficiency in using energy either centrally or locally. So then we come back into Elliot Giles and what does Elliot look like, and what do we know from him and how he presents, and from a structure, function, movement, and metabolism point of view. I'll try and take you through each one. So mainly keeping this obviously to the foot, ankle, shank, but from a structure point of view, we know that Elliot is tibial verum, and we know that he has a rigid cavus foot. So that's the way he's put together. That's his structure. So that will imply, or that will mean, he has to move in a certain way, and that means that we're going to see an increase in lateral forces, and we're going to see an increase in the velocity of pronation. So this increased rotation will place a greater demand on the medial calf, on obviously going further up the chain on the hamstrings and the lateral hip, but a big demand on the medial calf, probably on the forefoot and the rear foot as well. So as a result, we would really need a good medial calf muscle mass and a really good tibialis anterior to help compensate for the structure. But effectively, we've got reduced cross-sectional area of both. And so then we see the valux at the first MTPJ, because that's attempting to slow down the pronation. It's the last thing that can do that. And so the compensatory sign is it goes valgus. So from a muscle point of view, then we've got the functional hallux limitus at the great toe. So we've got this myofascial restriction as the great toe isn't able to go into extension through the normal range. So it's a sign of a muscle which is a secondary role, obviously, in controlling pronation, but now is potentially blocking pronation because it's too stiff. In podiatry terms, this is the third rocker that we're talking about here, but we've got a restriction at the third rocker. So increasing the mobility of the great toe or the myofascial compliance, we don't think would particularly help sustain any change at this point, because it's the muscle that is the key determinant. And then from an articular point of view, the reduced weight bearing dorsiflexion, that loss of the range of movement there will decrease the efficiency of the elastic energy that we've been talking about, because the joint doesn't then have normal excursion. It can't wind up the non-contractile tissue, which would provide that elastic energy. So for Elliot, that would mean then that the joint restriction means an increased intramuscular demand, but we've already said that the speeds that he's traveling at and the foot contact speed means that the muscle doesn't have time to work effectively, and the reduced muscle mass further reduces his ability of the muscle to compensate. So the joint then is the thing that's going to be taking more of the load. If we move on to function, we're looking at basically we're looking at force production and force absorption. So force production we would see as predominantly contractile, and force absorption relying mainly on the viscoelastic components. And at the foot ankle, we know that we're limited by both the reduced muscle mass, as I've said, and the reduced joint range at the talocrural joint, the subtalar joint, and the great toe. So we're starting to highlight where the problems are within each pillar. From a metabolic point of view, we've got from some screening that was done, Elliot had been able to do 23 single leg calf raises on the left hand side, and further up the kinetic chain. That again, just to show that we're not just looking at the foot ankle. We've got coronal plane hip deficits, and we've got trunk deficits, which we know we need to address. And then, so what we've done we've got a bucket load of testing of calf raises, and we know that 20 calf raises would be seen as the absolute minimum standard. And if you're below 20 calf raises on a 1 second up, 1 second down metronome and going through full range, but if you're below 20, then there's an increased risk of lower limb injury. So at 23, Elliot's just achieving minimum standard, but probably around 50% off where we would like a world-class endurance athlete to be, because we'd probably pitch that somewhere around 40 plus calf raises as a top end score. So we're some way off that. And then we kind of know that if the strength is down, that will limit our capacity, and we know that if the capacity is down, that will limit the ability to produce force. So from a movement point of view, we've got the increased whip that we've talked about across the foot, which is the movement compensation for the tibial varum. And initial contact now, when we're looking at Elliot moving at the speeds he's looking at, the initial contact will be midfoot rather than hindfoot, and so the calcaneum, the hindfoot, would be the first rocker. But that's taken out of the equation because he's landing on his midfoot, and we've already mentioned that he's got reduced dorsiflexion, and that would be the second rocker. So he's got a restriction in the fact that the tibia can't come over the ankle effectively. So the only place left for him to move would be the third rocker, which is the great toe into extension. But we also know that that's limited from a myofascial point of view. That's the functional hallux limitus that we've got. So we've got restrictions at 2 of the 3 rockers, and the first rocker isn't even being used in propulsion for him at these speeds. The reduced calf function was also seen as part of the screening process when we looked at Elliot doing a heel raise, and both straight leg and bent knee, there was no calcaneal inversion on the heel raise. So the obliquity of the Soleus attachment onto the calcaneus should create a moment arm that causes inversion at the calcaneum on initiation of the heel raise. This wasn't the case with Elliot on the left-hand side in straight leg heel raise, bent knee heel raise. And so from that, there's an indication of an inefficient calf. And if we marry that up with some of the other things that we've already mentioned, the loss of cross-sectional area, and then marry it with this, we start to pick up more signs that there's an inefficiency around that foot ankle. So as a result of the things that we're seeing, as a result of the restrictions and the lack of muscle mass, we then see a change in the way that he moves. And so we've got an increased forward lean and the increased internal rotation of the hip and reduced gluteal function. So we would argue that at the foot ankle, because he doesn't have the cross-sectional area, because he doesn't have the capacity or the force on the left-hand side to compensate effectively, then we're starting to see compensatory movement at the lumbopelvic region. So off the back of what we've seen, off the back of what we've picked up on each pillar there, just to highlight the things that I've sort of talked about already, we'd go in structure. Muscle mass is the issue. So what do we want to do? We need to build that muscle mass. We also, from a structural point of view, we'd be looking at improving joint mobility so we can improve that energy storage, but changing the muscle mass is seen as the key. So that would be pretty much priority number 1. From a function point of view, we want to, as I say, optimize the joint range of movement. If we can optimize the joint range of movement, we can increase force production. For the series elastic component, then we're going to improve that elastic energy transfer to go alongside that force production. So the function will improve, and we'll start to see better movement patterns. So into the movement, we're looking at as a key target here. We want to decelerate the pronation. That's what we're looking to try and achieve, so we can have a greater application of the vertical force. And then from a metabolism point of view, if we can improve the energy efficiency in the mitochondria to allow them to use force and elastic energy more efficiently, then we're going to see the progress that we want to see. But the structure that we've used, the philosophy that we've used, and the pillars that we've used have started to direct and tell us about where we want to go. So into the rehab, and what I've done here is, I'm not going to spend ages on this, obviously, because there isn't a huge amount of time, but these are, strength is underpinning this whole process. That's the first thing to say. So all the way through this, there's going to be, once the tissue can tolerate it, there's a strength stimulus that's running through the program. All I've put in here are the progressions that we've dropped in at certain points along the way. So there's other stuff running alongside this. There's the key priorities running alongside this, but there's a strength stimulus going through. So don't think one thing means that something else is, the strength stimulus isn't there because you can't see it in that day. It's an ongoing process. The other thing to mention would be that we were loading other muscle groups pretty much from day 2 as a circuit, with a big hip and trunk focus based on the screening and the things that we already knew. So on day 3, we started the peak force, which we did with isometric loading. We started the isometric loading at 1.5 times body weight. We knew that Elliot had been walking around for a couple of days pain-free, and we know that walking around, you put between 0.8 and 1.2 times body weight through your limb. So 1.5 times body weight seemed like a pretty comfortable place to start. There was no reaction. Obviously, that's being monitored as we go. So that was why we started there. And then we did some wide stance, double leg calf raises, and we chose the wide stance to try and bias towards the medial shank. And we chose a 303 sort of longer tempo to bias towards the tendon and non-contractile structures at the early stage of the process. By day 4, we introduced some lateral movements and some walking drills. So this was kind of slow loading, and we're trying to improve stiffness and motor patterning, but well below the demand of running. And then we finished the session with a banded 4-way movement with a resistance band where you pulse it to a second. And the idea of that is we're going to improve foot stiffness, we're going to improve proprioception, and there's also a reasonably high demand at the hip, which was clearly one of the areas higher up the chain that we were looking at targeting. By day 7, we were looking to really hit the muscle, and we went for a density of work circuit for the triceps surae. And so this density of work circuit is with minimal recovery, and we're looking at the metabolic function here of that muscle. We're trying to improve capacity, mitochondrial density, but we're providing a hypertrophic stimulus off the volume that he's able to do. So the double leg elastic component with the leg press was around 3 times body weight. The cocky walks or penguin walks were with a 10 kilogram weight above his head, taking a step of no more than the length of your big toe. And the bent knee Soleus, I think he started with 35 kilograms on his knee, but was quickly progressing to beyond 40. We also introduced some more dynamic sagittal plane drills with their neuromuscular components and the element of speed load to the tendon, and the skill of running. So we were hopefully starting to address those areas as well. By day 11, we introduced a bigger plyometric stimulus, which was box jumps, and we did that but just with the focus on the plyometric element. We got him to jump onto a box so we could take out the landing. So we tried to get the box to be about the height of where he was reaching inertia. So we're not giving him a load of pounding as he lands. And then Elliot was progressed back into running by day 13. He was into tempo at day 18, and he was back on the track and able to complete a session with no problems at day 25. I mentioned that there are other components going on, and other bits in the rehab process. So just as a quick example, and again, this is that kind of metabolic local muscular endurance circuit, where there's a bias towards a big volume of work. So this would be gone through, well, built to 4 times through this circuit, so it takes quite a while to do. And it's, as rehab goes, it's probably not the most interesting circuit ever in the world, but it's a pretty effective one. So by understanding what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and the adaptations we're looking for, we're able to design programs to suit that. So this is very much that metabolic element. So I guess that's Elliot back running. He was back running with no problems. I guess just a few thoughts and observations on what had happened. I was relatively new into the role, so I had screened Elliot, but we were like 6 weeks in. So I was 6 weeks into the role. He'd had a long history of parotinan problems, so there wasn't a great deal of longitudinal data because he'd been unable to test in the past. So we didn't have a recent peak force score. We weren't exactly sure where to get him back to from that point of view. So there were a couple of areas that made it perhaps a little bit more difficult, or there was some information that would have been nice to have. But the layers of screening go on, and the longitudinal data obviously happens over a period of time, and that would have been, so there were some nice to knows that we didn't have. The other issue there is that getting to testing can be a little bit of a challenge when you don't you're not at the central hub. But what we basically found was that the foot ankle was regarded as the key area, and so that had been the target, and it was already the target at the time of the injury, where we were looking at mobility for the soft tissue. We were looking at strategies around his subtalar joint and talocrural joint, his great toe extension, but building that muscle mass was seen as the key. The cross-sectional area of the medial shank and the tibialis anterior. And of course, we still had that focus on higher up the chain. So we looked to address a number of issues as we went along, but the main one was obviously foot ankle, and off the back of the injury, that's where we went. There are no more slides. That's all, thanks.